Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Could I ask you please to take your seats? So welcome to what I hope will be a very interactive hour and a half on the topic of driving growth in value-added manufacturing. I'd like to thank the Chamber for inviting me to moderate this panel, with a special thank you to Aliki for scheduling the panel in what must most definitely be the worst time slot of the summit. My name is Johan Lawrence. I am the Secretary General of the Joint Apparel Association Forum, the apex body for the textile and apparel export industry, and also the Chairman of the Exporters Association of Sri Lanka, which is the export arm of the Chamber, which represents both manufacturing and the services export sectors. Our topic today, driving growth in value-added export manufacturing, is a timely one, as we look to support the vision of the government to grow exports to 28 billion in merchandise exports by 2030. This is obviously going to need a multi-pronged approach, and as generic growth is obviously not going to get us there. As we unpick this target, growth in value-added exports is going to be a key component of that strategy, and the idea is to spend the next hour and a half deliberating on this subject. I don't want to go into too much detail on our speakers, as their detailed profiles are in the faculty book, but we'll mention that we have an international flavor this afternoon, as we will hear first from Parima, the Senior Manager, Global Trade and Advisory at Deloitte, to share her perspective on how Thailand strategically approached FTAs and see what lessons there might be for Sri Lanka to learn from that experience. After her presentation, Parima will join us on the panel, which represents both the state and the private sector. We have Mrs. Thilaka Jayasundara, Secretary to the Ministry of Industries and Entrepreneurship Development, to talk to us about how the ministry can play its role in this growth. And we will also hear from Suren and Rajitha of MAS Holdings and Haley's PLC, respectively, two of Sri Lanka's largest merchandise exports companies. We'll then take some questions from the audience. For those of you who are present in the hall, you can raise your questions and participate in the polls by going to slido.com. I think on each table there's a QR thing. The code is 2439072. For those joining us virtually, please use the Q&A function on the Zoom platform. I'd encourage you to please send in your questions as early as you can, so we can try and allocate enough time to deal with all of them. It's unfortunately not possible for us to be able to entertain direct questions, so please do use the Slido platform. A reminder, please, also to those joining virtually to make sure your mics are on mute. That's it from me on the housekeeping, and it now gives me a great pleasure to introduce Parima to you. Parima is a senior manager at Deloitte Thailand's tax and legal practice. Prior to joining Deloitte, Parima worked at the Ministry of Commerce for 15 years, covering a wide range of international and domestic trade issues at the Department of Trade negotiations, the permanent missions to Thailand to the WTO in Geneva, and the Department of Internal Trade. Some of her significant works include trade disputes under the WTO, FTA negotiations, customs valuation, agricultural trade, and intensive work relating to the passing of the new Competition Act of Thailand in 2017. She was also seconded to the Office of the Prime Minister of Thailand for a year and worked on the laws and regulations on other non-trade Thai agencies, such as parks, wildlife, plant conservation, natural resources, environmental, and planning. After her tenure in the government, she worked as a corporate lawyer in a real estate company for 2 years. She obtained her Masters of Law from Georgetown, Juris Doctor from Western Reserve University of Law in the USA, as well as Bachelor of Laws from Thammasat University in Thailand. She's also a Bachelor of Science in Economics from Duke University in the USA. Parima, it gives me great pleasure to invite you to take the stage.
Thank you, Johan. This is, the first time in many years hearing about my biography so full. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to standing here in front of all of you in this exciting time that your country is driving for accelerated economic growth. Success comes with drive and necessity. And I have felt it all along, from yesterday, the inaugural session, this morning discussions, that everyone here has very, very strong internal motivation and the reason to achieve it. So today, I will just humbly share Thailand's story. The short one. I'm not gonna go through maybe 30 minutes, and just through my lens of an ex-government officer as a trade negotiator and a current trade advisor. So the outline of my presentation, which is very straightforward. Well, I will lay out some of the statistics on important exported and imported products of Thailand. And then we'll talk a bit on the supply chain. We're talking so much on global supply chain, why, where, and what it is. And then I'll go through the cooperation. Well, I'm coming from, the lens of negotiators, and to negotiate FTAs and to come up with policies, economic policies, you do need cooperation among all the players. And then I will talk a bit on some of the key policies Thailand has recently undertaken, covering, all the areas, and then the conclusion. So maybe it's a bit too small, but I think you may get the slides later. So let's first look at the numbers of export and import values. So why Thailand is the value-added manufacturing economy? So look at, this is in 2024. So Thailand's total export is valued at around 300 billion US dollars, which is increased from the past year for 5.42%. The list of the exported products are automotives, automatic data processing, machines, precious stones, rubber products, machineries and parts, refined food, polymers of ethylene and propylene, electronic integrated circuits. So the right side of the slide just showing the destination countries of each of the product, and this one I just show the destination of the automotive products. Comparing to the imported side, you can tell. Oh, sorry, I want to go back. You can tell that the structure is similar. So this is the export one, the import one. The number is similar. So 306 billion US dollars for import value in 2024, and it's increased by 6.34%. So comparing to the export, just about the same. And when you're looking at the structure of the goods, they are all similar as well. So there are crude oil, electronic integrated circuit, machineries and parts, jewelry, chemicals, computers, and parts. So all of this show that Thailand actually import the raw materials into our country, and then we manufacture them, then export to other countries. So how are we getting there? So look at the supply chain. So now this is, maybe you all know about this, but just remind you a little bit on the supply chain. So the supply chain comes from the supplier, the procurement process, then you may need to do the storage, inventory, and also the logistic part of sending it to manufacturing facility. And then you may need to store again, and then you distribute to the customers. Traditionally, all of this happened could happen in one country or in, the countries that are neighboring. But when the world now is getting so much connected, all the process can happen anywhere in the world. You can have the supplier. Thailand may get the supplier from China. We get the raw materials. Someone sending, being the logistic provider. On the way, you may need to stop at a port, and then you come to Thailand, and then you have the manufacturing here in Thailand. Then the finished goods are stored in Thailand for a while, and then maybe go to Singapore, and then distribution to the consumers in the US, in the EU, wherever it is. So all of this are happening, and where do we want to be? I don't talk only, about Sri Lanka, but Thailand as well, and also other countries, because the world is changing every day. So you may have like new technology tomorrow, you may have something happening tomorrow, and then you need to try to position yourself. So the questions are, where do we as a country and as business operator fit into this picture? What can we offer to the global chain? What can we offer to the global customers? Geographically, should we be just very good at, being a logistic provider? Are we good at it? And as with the knowledge and the skill we have, do we want to be just the manufacturer? And, getting better and more adaptive in each day, how much do you want to do? All of the questions to this, all the answers to these questions that I have just asked will not and could not come from just one person. It needs to come from everyone who is involved, the public sector, the private sectors. And during my government career, I was in the trade negotiations department. All I have been trained is like, listen. We need to listen to the private sectors. We need to listen first to the Chamber of Commerce and the Federation of Industries, who will bring specific industries to us to discuss with us what they want, the market access. Do we want to sell this to that country? Can we have the FTA with this country? Is it possible? Or, okay, there are now, more imports from another country. We would like to have some transitional period, some, protection or training to strengthen the inside industries. So that's the business talking to each other. And then they came to the public sector, to our agency and other agencies, and then, talk about the problems. Then the governments also need to talk, the agencies talk among themselves too, that, okay, we have, industrial products, we have agricultural products, we have services sectors. What do we want to improve, really, in the long term, in the short term, in the medium term? So that's all the plan. So to me, agencies talk to each other. Associations, the private sector, well, this morning, someone just said that, one company cannot do it alone. Get together, be an association, or the same industry or the related industry come together and find where the goal of your industry and where you are, what the concerns are, and voice it out. So I look at it as in, the work of the private company and public sector is all the same. First, you set the goal, which you need to have, a common agreement, and then you plan, you implement. And if it doesn't work, you fix it, adjust it. You may go back to just implement it again, or plan again, or even set a new goal. So these are some of the key policies that I just would like to talk about and highlight. So I would say that they quite covered everything that has been discussed this morning. So this is the actual policies in Thailand. So I categorize them into the focused manufacturing support, investment promotion, networking support, and resource enhancement. So the first one is Thailand 4.0 initiative. This is the initiative that attempts to drive economic growth from an economy based on traditional industries to one driven by innovation, technology, and creativity. For example, Thailand, I think we're really famous on our food. Thai food is very popular in the world. So basically, the government and also the private sector come together, and we have so much, raw materials. So then how are we gaining the value added? So processed food industry coming in. And right now with the innovation, with the creativity, the food is now, superfood. And then we don't know what it would be like in the future. And that will not stop, should not stop you of just, being content of the present, but to be able to adjust all the time. And then we have also Eastern Economic Corridor. This is a major development initiative to transform 3 eastern provinces in Chachoengsao, Chonburi, and Rayong into a leading economic zone focused on innovation and high-tech industries. So we also, and this project also concerns with, the the smart cities and innovation, and also try to help the communities around the ECC to grow together. And that's how we try to expand development from the trade zone into communities. And next is the investment promotion. So these are incentives from the Board of Investment and other programs, benefits, it's called Customs Free Zone and Industry Estate Authority of Thailand. So all of these are the incentives that Thailand has issued, as measures, as laws to attract the investment to Thailand. And this is like how my work is now involved around this, giving advice on how you actually can utilize these incentives and get the benefits from. And next is the networking support, trade negotiations, trade agreements, and market access. So this is how you're going to expand your network. I think it is important because Thailand is also a small country, well, not as small as Sri Lanka, but unlike the US or China or India, they are so big. They have so many raw materials. They have, they can, produce from their raw materials. But lots of time, like Thailand, we don't have all the supplies. And we need to find markets for the finished good to be sold. So FTAs, RTAs are key to expand the horizon for your products and your services. So the networking is not only just goods, but also services, investment, and even technical cooperation and process cooperation. And the last one, well, everyone has been talking about this, so I'm not going to, go into detail. So this is about digital transformation. We're still doing that in Thailand too. Sustainability and green manufacturing, because this is the trend. So our customers, be the developed countries, they would like to see the products with the good standard of labor work, environment, and those sort of things. Human capital development and R&D support. So I end my last slide with this slide on that everything is just interconnected, and not just Sri Lanka, but I think it's everywhere. You look from the cooperation within your private sector, and then you have the cooperation within your public sector. Then because the world is just so small right now, don't you want to, talk to your friends in other countries? Coordination with them, both from the public sector and private sector's perspectives. Then you learn about other standards, other markets. There are opportunities out there. But then you also need to just make sure that because you are the private sector, when you export to other countries, when you import from other countries, you need to abide by rules and laws of other countries. So that's how, the private sector interacting with the public sectors. within and outside the country. So I will end my presentation here. We'll give the floor to the panel, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Parima. Thank you for that excellent presentation. And if I can now call the other members of the panel. So we have Mrs. Tilaka Jayasundara, Secretary, Ministry of Industries and Enterprise Development, Suren Fernando, Group CEO of MAS Holdings, and Rajitha Karyavasam, Managing Director of HECAB PLC and Joint MD of DIP Products and Haley's Fiber. Thank you. And thank you. And again, just a reminder to people to please use the Slido to send your questions in. Parima, thank you so much. That was a very useful presentation and I think gives us a lot of context for what we're going to discuss. Madam Tilaka Jayasundara, the new government in its manifesto identifies one of the root causes for the challenges faced by the country as a lack of a comprehensive plan to enhance production capabilities, and goes on to identify the requirement for a comprehensive short and long-term industrial development plan that leverages the country's strategic location. As Secretary to the Ministry of Industries and Entrepreneurship Development, how does your team support this process?
Thank you, Johan. First of all, let me thank Rima for your wonderful presentation and all the details were there. And also, thank you very much for the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce for lobbying this policy dialogue, very important policy dialogue. As you requested, Mr. Johan, I want to mention that the Ministry of Industries, in align with the government current policy, that ministry has developed the 5-year roadmap. Actually, we identified the issues and challenges as also the barriers in developing the industry sector in Sri Lanka. We developed the 5-year roadmap. We already aligned this roadmap with the present government policy. And also we identified the clear goals for achieving within another 5 years period. As I clearly mentioned that, as you mentioned, export income, that the GDP of the Sri Lanka the present GDP of Sri Lanka is around 84 billion US dollars. Out of this 84 billion, the export contribution is around 19.6. That means 20%. So out of 20%, the merchandise contribution is around 79%. So the ministry, currently, the EDB Export Development Board comes under purview of the ministry. So we have fixed the export targets, what we are going to achieve by 2030. Actually, in 2030, as you clearly mentioned that, we have fixed the target to achieve 28 billion US dollars from merchandise. So this is not an easy task. It is a very difficult task, but we clearly plan how to achieve this task by 2030. Gradually and annually, we have fixed the targets and easily identified the KPIs and given the task to each and every sector. The Export Development Board under purview and the supervision of the ministry. Now they are working very closely with all the exporters. And also, Johan, I want to mention that Sri Lanka, we really want to expand our export basket. We want to diversify the export basket. And also we want to invite the new investors and the new industries to come to enter the export market. And we identified the barriers, and also the ministry has working with 20 industry sectors. We developed and established 20 industrial sector advisory committees and identified the possible industries which easily can go to the export market. When we consider the tile and bathware sector and the ceramic sector, we know that 85% local raw materials are used to enhance the tile and manufacture, that bathware manufacturing sector. There are some barriers, and you know that we don't have the national tariff policy. So the present government, now we are in a process of developing the national tariff policy. So with the national tariff policy, we want to establish the equal playing field for all the parties, importers as well as the manufacturers of our country. So now Anti-Dumping and Countervailing Act, we are in the process of imposing that act, and also we will improve, we will develop and implement and introduce the national tariff policy by this year, 2025. So after we implement these kind of policies, and I'm sure that our exporters and the industry, local industries, very easily can develop their industries. And also you know that Sri Lanka, 90% of the Sri Lankan export income and the revenue are handled by the 10% of the industries. And the 400, nearly around 400 industries, they are the representing of 90% of the export income. And also the apparel sector. When we consider the apparel sector is the largest contributor to the export revenue in our country. So that's why I mentioned, we mentioned you that we want to diversify the export market and diversify the export basket. And therefore, the ministry has identified several and challenges and barriers, and we develop so many policies and developing policies for enhancing and overcome these barriers. And also, Johan, that as I mentioned, that Sri Lanka, we really identified the sectors like assembling, automobile industry and component manufacturing sector. Very easily we can introduce our component manufacturers and link those component manufacturers with the global value chain. So that is the thing that Ministry of Industries, we are developing standard operating procedures for identifying the assemblers and supporting them to develop their industries in Sri Lanka. After the Ministry of Industry introduced that SOP, that we identified so many industries, new industries are come to the assembling industry, but the important thing, many component manufacturers already they link with the global market. Likewise, that we identified the possible industries, packaging industry, and also like boat building and shipbuilding pay. We have the possibility, big possibility to go to the export market. We already identified those kind of industries and the sectors which the possibility is there for go to the export market. So ministry as a team, the Ministry of Industries, now I want to mention all the IDB, Industrial Development Board, and also Small Entrepreneurship Development Division, and the National Entrepreneurship Development Authority, and the National Productivity Secretariat. All the institutions this time comes under purview of the ministry. So we will guide these institutions and develop policies to develop and support the SME sector, especially the SME sector, to identify the possibilities to go to the export market, as well as that we are working to identify this SME sector to link with the big and large industries in Sri Lanka. That kind of policy measures are already taken, and we believe that with all the support of other government institutions, and especially with the support of Ministry of Finance, we identified and plan and develop the policies to support the Sri Lankan manufacturing industries.
Thank you. That's very comprehensive, and I agree with you. I think, picking up what Parima talked as well, that the role of the government authorities is to make sure that you build this framework and you identify the strategies that are needed and then implement it. And as you said, you have under your ministry, you have a number of institutions. So hopefully that would make it easier where you're not dealing with different line ministries. Suren, moving on to you. So MAS is a global player. You've got manufacturing locations in a number of countries. Could you explain to us the rationale for choosing these various countries for setting up manufacturing facilities, and how the global value chain plays into that strategy, and in particular, where Sri Lanka fits into that picture?
Sure. Thanks. Thank you, Johan. The Sri Lankan apparel and textile industry is primarily B2B. We serve brands and retailers in different parts of the world. And therefore, when selecting a specific country to set up operations, the customer lock-in or the customer sponsorship plays a very critical role. So we would sort of identify and develop the filters in terms of selecting a strategy jointly together, because then the customer also takes some degree of ownership. They might support you with a certain volume of business during the startup years. They might actually do a joint investment with you. They might even support you with certain financial benefits during those initial startup years and so on. So the customer sponsorship plays a very critical role when you select a country or a particular sourcing destination. When it comes to the filters that we use when we organize our global sourcing and supply chain, obviously, trade and duty benefits play a very critical role in selecting countries, more for the short to medium term, because you really don't know how these agreements would pan out in the long term. But certainly in the short term, trade and duty tariff benefits play a very important role. Cost overheads, cost competitiveness, and productivity. They both go hand in hand. We have certain countries in which we have set up operations. They are certainly a lot more expensive, probably, than Sri Lanka, but the productivity would outweigh or balance off the cost increase. So therefore, the cost competitiveness plays another very important role. And this is also important for us to decide the balance between labor and automation. For example, if a country is more expensive, we might drive more automation and focus less on sort of the skilled labor portion. Proximity to key markets, again, is very important to customers. Today's world changes so rapidly. Customer trends, consumer trends keep changing, and therefore speed to market is critical, and therefore locating certain operations that are closer to the customer is also important, so that you can shorten your lead times and respond rapidly to changing customer needs. Another very important piece, I would say probably over the last 4 or 5 years, it will certainly become even more important, is the development of the supply chain. The materials that come into a country. Historically, in our industry, the supply chains were organized mostly for cost optimization, and you would end up sourcing from 6 countries to put a product together in one country. But the recent years, with its COVID-19, global wars, the Red Sea crisis, have clearly shown that whilst cost optimization is important, the resilience and the reliability of the supply chain would trump cost competitiveness. So therefore, really making sure that your supply chain is secure and there is a certain degree of verticality, either in country or in the region, becomes I would say, paramount. The apparel and textile industry, as you most might know, is the second largest polluting industry in the world, and therefore sustainable and ethical manufacturing practices also play a very critical role in selecting a particular country or a region. Brand reputation, whether it's for us or for the retailers and brand that we work, is everything. I would say topmost of priority, and therefore if a country does not demonstrate that it has a certain level of stability, and there is ethical business practices, and there are sustainable material sources, that will certainly get deprioritized. So these are some of the filters that we use in selecting countries. When it comes to Sri Lanka as a sourcing destination, we continue to be very attractive for almost all our customers and brands. What makes Sri Lanka sort of special, or how can we differentiate ourselves? We are still able to offer design to delivery solutions than most countries. I wouldn't say all countries, but than most countries, we are still able to offer that design to delivery solutions out of Sri Lanka. We have a very mature, experienced workforce, not only at shop floor, but even at all levels of management. We also are considered as forward-thinking in terms of innovation, and we use modern manufacturing technology as well. And the biggest opportunity that we see, and I'm sure most industries see, is the opportunity that is presented through digital technology. And even in our industry, we can see that it's going through a major transformation. We have, in Sri Lanka, a fairly well-developed supply chain, probably not enough, and there's certainly work to be done, but a fairly well-developed supply chain. And we are also recognized globally as an ethical sourcing manufacturing destination. And this is something I believe Sri Lanka can continue to leverage on and really build on, whether it's the use of, whether it's the methods that we use to dispose our waste, or control of emissions, ethical labor practices, and so on. So these are some of the things that still make Sri Lanka very attractive. And sometimes we do take this for granted, but the economic and political stability, at least our industry has enjoyed since, I would say, for the last couple of decades, is also critically important to our customers. Even during times where the country went through certain other challenges, our industry was able to operate with minimum disruption. And I think that has given customers a lot of confidence to know that Sri Lanka is a reliable and a sustainable sourcing destination to buy their merchandise.
Thanks, Suren. That's clear. And I think you start seeing some threads that will pull together, because what Parima talked about also was that sort of strategic thinking. And I think even in Thailand's case, there was a large interaction with the manufacturers to understand what they need, particularly in terms of free trade agreements, particularly in terms of linking up to backward linkages to supply chains, to making sure that we have all of those things lined up. So I think a more strategic, thought-out process with the involvement of both private sector and the state is I think, something that's going to be key, and something that we will continue to push to drive. Rajitha, just moving on to you. So Haley's probably the single largest merchandise exporter out of Sri Lanka. I think about 6%, of exports come under Haley's banner. You also have a large range of manufacturing facilities overseas. Just talk to us a little bit, if you would, about how Sri Lanka fits into that picture and what we bring to the table.
Thank you, Juan, and good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to be in this forum today, organized by the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. As Juan correctly mentioned, Haley's is one of the largest diversified export segments in Sri Lanka. We contribute somewhere between 5 to 6% of the merchandise exports out of the country. So if I go for key sectors of Haley's, which has a strong Sri Lankan presence, whilst they have expanded overseas as well. First industry which is very close to my heart is HECAB, which is a global leader in coconut shell-based activated carbon. So we have about 16% of the global market share. Almost 60% of our turnover comes out of the Sri Lankan exports, and the balance 40% by value is overseas, meaning it is Thailand and Indonesia primarily. And now we are building our 7th manufacturing plant in Philippines. So when I mention these countries, you would realize why we have gone to those countries. It's closer to our raw material, the availability of raw material. And you all know the coconut crisis we have today. We don't have to dwell on that too much. So we saw this problem a few decades ago, and we diversified our manufacturing footprint where the raw material is abundantly available and close, because transportation of that commodity, which is a dangerous cargo, is next to impossible. So that has been the primary reason for HECAB to diversify and into the other geographies. Second reason being, obviously with international clientele, there has to be risk mitigation in terms of geographical spread. So that has given a secondary reason as well. Then if you look at the products, which is primarily in the manufacture and marketing of both household and industrial gloves, both in the natural rubber and the synthetic. Again, our move into Thailand, we have about 50-50 split bit of turnover between the Sri Lanka and Thailand. Again, to do with Thailand being a country where there is abundance of natural rubber latex. So what we have done is, as a strategy, more and more synthetic latex products on value addition is maintained in Sri Lanka, and most of the natural rubber latex is moved to Thailand. So that has been our primary reason. Again, the risk mitigation aspect, and also looking at some of these markets, some of these countries have large local markets. If you take to Thailand, Thailand has a very large glove market. Thailand has a very large coconut carbon market internally. So those have also helped us to, as a subsidiary factors, to go in. Then the other industry that we are in on fiber, we are in a limited way. Coconut fiber products, we are moved into Thailand, into India. That is again due to raw material availability and the cost factors involved in that. Then we have certain set of exports that are 100% Sri Lankan. The fabric manufacturer, Helis Fabric, which is closer to Suren as well, because we are nominated supplier of brands to the garment industry. So entire fabric manufacturing, fabric mills are in Sri Lanka. So has not been any reason for us to go out, because there is a strong garment industry that has evolved. And we have done significant value addition into moving the value chain of the garments. And we are into aluminium, again, a newly emerging export segment for us, and the agri-products. So you understand the key rationale of we moving out. Then the next question is, why did we retain that majority in Sri Lanka is a pertinent question, right? Why didn't we move everything out? Why did we retain a majority? If you look at the overall Helis portfolio, about 70% of our exports still is maintained in Sri Lanka. So here what I call, over time, over experience, our centers of excellence, like the centers of the R&D, technical and engineering resources primarily, backed by other supply chain initiatives, our home base has been here. So we have built a lot of skill and technology and know-how around it. And given that fact, and also given the fact that we are Sri Lankan domiciled company, we have certain responsibility, and also there's an emotional attachment to Sri Lanka. So those reasons as to the ability to create what you call these centers of excellence in primarily driving what I call sustainable innovation as a key requirement for value addition has enabled us to stay in Sri Lanka. And I must say, in the Sri Lankan environment, I mean, we have an excellent environment for us to move in the value chain and promote this sustainable innovation, take a leadership in the green manufacturing, sustainability, other initiatives, ESG, and we have the capability to move up on the innovation and the technology. So that primarily has helped us to maintain that the most value-adding 70% in Sri Lanka. However, one must note that that is how we feel as investors who have been in the country for 50, 60 years. And we have a large resource base and management and expertise base in Sri Lanka who has that primary knowledge. But the situation is going to be totally different for an outside investor who is looking at our country for the first time. So these two should not be misinterpreted or misconceptualized, because the requirement for a foreign investor to come into the country are totally different to what an established investor has found comfort with. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajasa. That was very comprehensive. Parima, coming back to you. Sri Lanka unfortunately missed the bus when post-COVID businesses moved out of China. Similarly, in round one of the Trump presidency, we saw countries like Vietnam benefit from inflows of FDI. Who do you feel will be the winners in round two of Trump's presidency?
Hello. Hi. Okay. This is on, right? Well, I want to just go back to the first part of the question first on the miss the bus and miss the train. So let's say you missed the bus and your destination was Bangkok. So you used to miss the bus to Bangkok. Right now, it has been some time, right, from that time when you said you missed the bus. Right now, you need to talk to each other, just in our family. Where do we want to go? Do we still want to go to Bangkok? Or do we want to go to Hanoi or Singapore City? Then when you get you get to that destination, we don't have only bus and train right now. You can jump on the plane because that would be faster. You have the technology or not, then you can go faster. So even though you miss those train or those bus, it's the past. So focus on the now, which is actually for everyone, not only Sri Lanka. And I would say the one who will win would be the one who adjusts fast. Right now, you can just me keep on going, checking what Trump has issued this morning, which executive orders is the tariffs, raised higher, and those sort of things. So you just need to be able to adjust well and fast, and be fighting friends. I guess that's how Thailand is now doing. So with all the Trump's policies going on, we now going forward with negotiations with the EU, with South Korea, also with Bhutan, and ASEAN Canada is also ongoing. So that's how we connect more. So then we get the supplies and we get the market. And also you need to emphasize on the incentives of the country. For example, right now, Thailand also just adjusted the policy to attract the skilled labor to come to Thailand. So I'm not saying that we will win, but who adjusts fast and looking at your industries, looking at what you have, build on it, and then you just don't miss the bus or the train, and you take on the plane.
Thank you. That's a very apt description. And I think, I suppose for Sri Lanka, the challenge is in the midst of an IMF program, how you then create the set of incentives that is going to allow people to invest. We've actually had a number of questions come in, so I'm going to upset my panelists and jump around into some of the questions that have come from the audience. In terms of the government, there's two questions, and I'll put them together. One is, what plans does the government have to effectively use consulates, high commissions, embassies across the world to bring in investment? And what assistance is the government planning to offer to offer investors to come in? So how do we use our embassies, and what is it we can do to help attract investment?
Yeah, Johan, actually, as we clearly identified, there are so many trade councillors and the commerce attaches in the embassies that we, the president, with the participation and the leadership of the HE, that he already guide all the ministries to invite and conduct the separate meeting for all the high commissions to identify the possible investments from other countries. And all the guidance are there. Now we are planning to use all the opportunities with the high commissioners of other countries. And also, Johan, I want to mention that very recently, after 28 years, we reconvened the Export Development Council of Ministers with the chairmanship of the President. After last 27th, we conducted that forum after 28 years. Right? After 92 years, we conducted and reconvened the Export Development Council of Ministers. So at that forum also, President guide all the government ministries to identify the barriers and find the solutions for overcoming these barriers. All the ministries, subject ministries and government line ministries and government departments, they participated, and we could be able to settle so many issues at that first council meeting. And also, Johan, you mentioned that we really want to, Rajita and they also mentioned that we want to attract the foreign direct investment in Sri Lanka. When we consider the ease of doing business index of Sri Lanka, we are in 99th position. So when we analyze the reasons for lagging behind, the number one reason is poor, government bureaucracy. Inefficient government bureaucracy is the number one reason. Even though whether I'm a government officer, I want to mention that when we are inviting the investors, actually those investors have to submit their applications for nearly around 82 government institutions to get the license and the approvals from the government. And also the number two reason is poor work ethic culture of the nation, and the restrictive labor legislation and policy inconsistency, those kind of barriers are there. Therefore, when we want to get the, or allocate the land for the investment, it will take around uh, 269 working days to allocate the land for the investment. And also when you apply for getting the environment license, it will get another 116 days. Working days to get the environment clearance. But actually, unfortunately, when we consider those things and we discuss, we already developed the task force to identify these investment facilitation barriers. And we identified the barriers and proposed many recommendations to implement the government. We already identified all the barriers. As I mentioned that, now all the government institutions must be instructed to develop these procedures, systems and process to facilitate the investment. And even though whether there is the BOI, Board of Investment, and Board of Investment, to get the Board of Investment approval for the foreign direct investment, it will take around nearly 80 days to get the approval for the BOI. And we identified we can reduce this approval process up to 14 days, at least 2 weeks. Within 2 weeks' time, they can give the approval for the investment. And also, sometimes these kind of barriers we already identified, all the government institutions, through this Export Development Council meeting, they can develop their procedures and process. And also, I want to mention, Johan, for land allocation. And in Sri Lanka, do you have the idea that we only have 0.4% for allocated land for the industries in Sri Lanka? Actually, the international norm is around 3%. But the ministry, we have fixed the target, KPI, and the goal to enhance this land extent up to 1% by 2030. For allocating the lands, we identified 50,000 acres for allocating industries, and we identified these lands with the support of all the government institutions, which are responsible for land allocation for the industries. I believe, and also as the government officer, I feel the secretary, as the Secretary Minister of Industry, we can fix these lands for the investment, and within 22 working days, not the working days, 22 days, within 22 days, we can allocate the land for the specific industries when we after we identified these 50,000 acres land. Also, within another 62 days, we can give the long-term lease agreements to the investors to start their businesses. Likewise, we simplify the procedures and process. The only thing with the new government, in align with the government procedures and the policies, we want to declare these policies and we want to declare these procedures to the government institutions and issue the instruction. The ministry will take the leadership for that, and also we can do it. And also, as our other panelists mentioned, that improving the productivity, labor productivity is very important. So that's why that there are so many labor legislatives are there, restrictive labor legislatives are there, Ministry of Labor, and they are identified these, simplify these labor legislations to support the industries. That kind of initiatives are there. I feel with these kind of initiatives, we can support the investment and foreign direct, especially the foreign direct investments. And also, local investments are also there. And very recently, the government, they declared the policy for research and development commercialization program. They launched the Ministry of Industries. We identified several public-private people participation programs, and we will call the EOI for invest in those kind of projects are also there. And this kind of research and development commercialization program will support foreign direct investment and as well as the local investments to enhance the economy of our country.
Thank you. I think you're spot on. I think the research and development, the technology piece, I think these are pieces that there's a role to play in terms of facilitating these. Rajitha, just in terms of just global value chains and building on some of the things that we've just talked about, How does Sri Lanka position itself in the global value chain, given things like high cost of doing business, shortage of labor, a more tech-savvy workforce? What do you see as the right set of investments that will work to ensure we encourage the right type of investments into Sri Lanka? What would your recommendations be?
Yeah. So it is a very pertinent question. What actually Sri Lanka needs now, yesterday, and also to execute very expediently. The first of all, I think there has to be a clear demonstration from top to bottom of the government and the other institutions that economic development led by exports, industrialization, is the number one priority of this country. It should not be limited to a paper or a statement, but by the actions of the institutes, by the top, coming from the top down, that must be demonstrated. Because Sri Lanka has so many problems today. But if you do not prioritize, if you do not identify and demonstrate by action, because this is where we have missed every time. We have done plans, we have set up committees over and over again. And to the current bureaucracy, the committee's bureaucracy, the recommendations pile up, right? But where is the execution? If this execution happen, are we talking about till this 14, 15 million at a $15 billion exports? I could remember 5 years back, I sat on some of these forums and we were talking about reaching $50 billion exports 5-6 years ago. Still we are at $16 billion. And now we are talking about in 5 years, we are going to achieve 28 billion exports and 30 billion total merchandise exports and 30 billion total exports. So what is that priority by what I call by walking the talk from top to top down, it must be demonstrated. So in this, I identify about 5 factors that are essentially required if you look at the merchandise to kick off at an expedient rate. If you want to go to $30 billion, you need to have double-digit growth in exports every year, about 13% annualized. We have not had that. We have gone backward because of the economic downturn, and we are trying to come back strongly. So the first one is definitely, as correctly pointed out previously, ease of doing business. We need to cut the bureaucracy. We need to have fast land approvals. I'll give you an example. Our latest investment in Philippines, when we went there, I was pleasantly surprised. I could reach the BOI not through connections, through social media. All I want to do is go to LinkedIn, BOI of Philippines, coconut sector, boom, all the necessary director generals, everybody is in LinkedIn. And just connect, have a chat, set up the calls, and get the overall framework done. And how they welcomed us when we want to set up. We have only had a moderate investment in the Philippine size, only $10 million. But coconut sector was a high priority for Philippines. It's coming from the president's direction. So when we went in, we were accommodated by the BOI, we were taken to different lands, even the raw material. They went with us 3 days, sponsored by BOI vehicles, taking the investor around, facilitating everything so that I'll be keen, my team will be keen to invest in Philippines. So that is the welcome you receive, the first impression of the country. That is so crucial. We may think about digitalization is required, but if we don't have digitalization, if we can't run today, how do you walk fast? We have so much people in the country, so much in the public sector. Even in an investor comes, you can appoint one manager, each for an investment. So look at this in a new way. If we wait till this digitalization happens to kickstart the economy, we are going to miss the bus again. Do the manual processes, but do expediently. And do not repeat what is already done in the world. South Korea example is there, Singapore example is there. If you want Rwanda example that is happening today, is there. Learn from them, apply what is relevant to us locally, and go back to some of the good things we have done. 1977, Mr. Jayajawardena, the Greater Colombo Economic Commission, a success story. Mr. Premadasa, the setup of the garment industry, another success story. How did they do that? How did they do that? With the same administration, technology 30, 40 years ago, but they had vision, clear focus, execution. Mr. Premadasa used to sit, I could remember those days. I mean, he was personally supervising projects. So that is critical. That is critical. And the second thing is, we have to have the incentives. IMF is blocking us. Why? We don't know. The new investments, even to FDI to be attracted to Sri Lanka, we are not able to give tax incentives. Why is that? We have to convince the IMF now. It's a good time. Say that we need to bring the foreign investment. It's not going to affect the existing tax base. You can continue to tax exporters at 30%, but new investments come in, provide the incentives. Philippines way went in. First 5 years, tax holiday. Next 10 years, half tax rate, where the full tax rate is less than 30% that we pay in exports. All duty-free, those access is available. So you have to have that. That's why I said earlier, when somebody looks from outside, they have the Asian map. They have 5, 6, 7, 8 countries to look around. So if you don't have the incentives, who's going to look at us? So that is very critical for the government to get this approved or rather concurrence with the IMF to incentivize the new investment, foreign direct, foreign as well as local. Then the third factor is we had to get our medium to long-term energy balance correct. Sri Lanka is very high cost on energy. So getting the correct renewable mix and getting lower cost fossil fuel resources, either LNG or even a second coal plant. I know that it's no for sustainability, but before the environmental sustainability, economy has to run. If Sampur is a place to have the second coal plant, go for it and have the power base. Then the next factor, because of the time I will fast track, I want to highlight these 5 factors. The next most important factor is management of the water resources. Do you know that, I mean, a lot of people don't know this. There is no industrial water available at the moment in any of the zones. If a large chemical industry wants to come and set up, say $50 million, $100 million, chemical industry wants to come in, there is no water. Can you imagine that? A country where abundant water resources are there, so much rainfall, but everything goes to the sea. So what I'm talking about here is, for example, industry like hay carbs, industry like gloves reproducts, they require at least 1,000 cubic meters of water a day. There are 2 zones that can accommodate, that has that facility. One is Biagama, one is Katnayaka. Both are capped. They can't expand anymore. And we don't have solid waste disposal in the country still, apart from the geocycle, whatever the INSI plant. So this critical facility, infrastructure, has to be there. So if the government is talking about the new zones, that's very good. But a new zone to come in, it will take 2, 3 years. What can you do immediately? Expand the Biagama zone. There was a plan to have the phase 3 or phase 4. Expand it, allow for at least another 50 industry to set up there with additional water. So by the time you build another zone, at least 50 more industries can come and occupy in Sri Lanka. We are looking for land. We can't find land with water. And the last factor I want to highlight is education. Very important. Sri Lanka has to get the higher education policy framework, invite the private universities to come. We have to basically accelerate the generation of, especially the STEM graduates, because the way the exodus of the people that has taken place, by another few years, if we don't churn out more and more STEM graduates, Sri Lanka is going to starve with the technical resources. So these are some of the key factors you have identified as primary to our industrial development.
Thank you, Rajat. Thank you for that. Parima, just to pick up on some of the things that Rajat mentioned and some covered in the questions as well. In terms of the digitalization, what was Thailand's experience on digitalization, and how important is that in this process of step change?
Well, I would not say that I have, the direct experience in this, but I have been in some of, let's say, the training for, the middle range career government officers. So let's say like the officers from lots of industry, lots of ministries, let's say from commerce ministry, also from agriculture. So everyone will be trained on what does it mean first by digital transformation. It's not digitalization, trying to put things on paper into the system, but actually to transform the system to work with the people, with the officers, and and also take into account the consumers' needs and requirements. I would say that we have been increasing the digital transformation level, but to my personal opinion, we still have a lot more to do, because lots of agencies still thinking of it as, digitalization. We're putting the paper onto the system, but we need to link. There are some now linkages, information, personal information of, let's say, one ministry to the other ministry. So then but those also are subject to, the personal data protection law. So with that, we have more convenience in terms of business people going to the Department of Business Development for registration. The information just, can pull out very easily. But then if you don't have the connection with other agencies, then you still have some problem. Or right now, let's say for export part, I know that Customs Department has tried, because every day we have more import license requirements coming up. So customs need to link to all of those import license requirements. So then when the import comes to Thailand, so they need to, make sure that all the import license is already been satisfied and, come into Thailand without being stuck, being the customs custody. So I would say that all of them, that's the example that I can give at this time. But to me, I think we still need more.
So just building on that, in terms of moving on. But I think digitalization. There was a session this morning, I think, on Sri Lanka's plan for digitalization, and I'd urge those who didn't watch that to make sure you do catch that. Just very much carrying on in that thing in terms of FTA. So one of the issues that is frequently cited for Sri Lanka's poor export growth is its small basket of exports and limited markets that we export to. What is it that Sri Lanka should be doing differently if we want to make the step change in both the product basket and the markets that we export to?
Well, I need to please excuse me on, the knowledge of, the types of imports or exports of Sri Lanka. But I just heard from Jaya that right now the government, trying to spot the potential of exports and imports within the different industries, and that's a good sign. So then the private sectors need to come out too, because maybe you are somewhere hiding and we don't know that you have, this sort of thing that are so good to be available to the global customers. So that's, I think, the way you need to try to spot the potential products. And that's where you can go for diversifying the export market. And then by diversifying the countries, just like in the private company, you just need to know this is the product that you have, and this is going to be cater to some specific customers. For Thailand, let's say for food, let's say chicken. We would like to go to the Islamic country. We need to meet the halal standard. So we put up the standard, try to produce the goods that meet that standard, and then diversify our customers, the countries. So that's how it works. I think, like, I just give very basic example.
Thank you. Tilaka, in terms of zones, and this question has come up quite a bit, is there and Rajda identified the issue of land, is there a plan to put up new export processing zones, and is there, connected to that, is there something that should look at zones for specific industries or specific product areas? What is the thought process in terms of how we create more zones to create the investment that's needed?
Yes, Johan, actually, as Rajita mentioned, we know that infrastructure is the most burning issue for the investment in Sri Lanka. The president and the present government has identified three BUI zones to declare in this year: Parantan, Kankasanture, and another zone in north central part, and also the Ministry of Industries. We are identifying 7 new zones to give the investors to invest in Sri Lanka. Actually, as he clearly mentioned, sometimes that industrial water and other infrastructure is the biggest problem when we are allocating the zones in different areas. So that is the thing that we are already mentioned, that all the government institutions are in a process of developing to provide these facilities within the specific zones. As Eraur zone, we plan that zone to develop the fabric for the textile industry, and that zone also we are facing in providing the water facilities for the investors. Now currently one industry is there that they are already planned to develop their fabric manufacturing zone. But unfortunately, water is a problem. This year, we discussed with the water ministry and other investors and invite the investors to provide the infrastructure to that zone also. The government this year, as I mentioned, that we want to develop the sector-specific zones. We want to allocate the land for the sectors. This year, the Ministry of Industries, we are planning to develop automobile and component manufacturing sector zones, and also rubber manufacturing sector zones. Another one is pharmaceutical sector. Likewise, that we have planned to develop sector-specific zone, Mr. Johan. So I feel that all the government institutions who are responsible for providing the infrastructure facilities, and easily, if we allocate the land for the sectors, easily the government organization like Ministry of Water and Water Board, they can allocate their waters to that sector-specific zone, and also infrastructure. It is very easy for all the institutions to provide the infrastructure to the separate single area. So likewise, the government has planned to identify and declare the BOI zones as well as the Ministry of Industry zones this year.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask everybody to move along quickly because we just in the last sort of 15, 20 minutes. Suren, other than FTAs, what would you see as the levers that the government should push in order to be able to boost exports, particularly of the apparel sector?
Sure. I think what Rajesh enumerated applies to us as well. Johan, FTAs are important, but there's more to it than FTAs as well. If you look at our industry, we can never be as big as a Bangladesh or a Vietnam, and we don't need to be purely competing on a volume of exports. So I think we have to very clearly pick the segments, the countries, and the brands and retailers that we really want to go into, and then deeply penetrate into those markets. And that requires a specific sort of focus and investment as well. If you look at, again, our industry, Johan, and you and I are both in the same industry, we are going through a lot of changes, some transformational changes, whether it's in manufacturing or in the way in which a garment is developed and designed. When you look at development and design, there's so much that's taking place, with digital technology where you don't need to make a lot of samples anymore. You can use very sophisticated 3D technology and fit the garment on avatar and see how the garment would perform in terms of, aesthetics, fit, comfort, and all of that. But these things are not cheap. The technology is not cheap, and certainly it requires a revamp in terms of training and development of our employees, whether it's at shop floor or even at executive levels. When you look at manufacturing, there's so much that's taking place to revolutionize the way in which a garment is produced. From our conventional, sewing technology, we are moving into various ways of, bonding and welding and so many new technologies that are coming through. Again, it's not cheap. And again, it requires a revamp and retooling of factories. And these require significant sums of money. But if we don't do it, we'll certainly fall behind the industry curve. So I think for those, Johan, there has to be government intervention, whether it's support through tax incentives or whether it's through training and development, and really promoting and focusing the industry to go behind these segments that we would clearly identify.
Just connected to that, and again, I know you touched on the role of the customer earlier as well, but a lot of brands will select suppliers and locations based on nominations. So do you see this still being the case, and do brands drive our future? How do we take control of the narrative here?
I think to some extent the brands will continue to play a significant sort of role and influence us because we are, primarily B2B. But there are certain areas in which we can be more on the offensive. And I think a big area for us in our industry is again sustainability. If you look at, and I think the regulation will first come in Europe and then probably followed by the rest of the world, where there's going to be regulation coming very soon, where the garment has to, the garments you wear have to last longer, be repairable, have some element of recycling, and be recyclable, because the end of life disposal of the garment will get transferred to the brands, from a state or a government, and that means a huge responsibility and a onus that the brands have to take, and if we are able to really leverage on that, come up with new technologies and solutions where we can use sustainable materials. We as an organization have tied up with various institutions, across the world to attract and also to invest in some of these businesses where there is now garment-to-garment recycling, polyester-to-polyester recycling, use of some natural resources like wood pulp to make yarns and fabrics. We might not be able to attract all of those investments to Sri Lanka, but if we are able to tie up with some of these institutions and these organizations, bring in that value-added raw material, make the product and then ship it, I think then we can clearly influence and play a much bigger role in the customers' sort of product portfolio, and we are able to then differentiate ourselves in terms of pricing. We don't need to compete purely on price. That might not take us from the 5 billion current to the 8 billion, but at least it will help us to generate more value add in Sri Lanka.
Thank you, sir. I think that again picks on something we touched on earlier about building back the value chains in terms of identifying those industries and then working to build back their value chains. Just on FTAs, because it's come in a couple of times, ma'am, in terms of the current status of the Thailand-Singapore FTAs, and also is there any update in terms of discussions on FTAs with China and ETCA within India? Would you have an update on that?
Actually, because of some legal barriers, unfortunately, we could not implement the Thailand FTA. So the Singapore FTA is also discussing, and the China, the Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Trade and Ministry of Industries, we are in a process of identifying the possibilities of discuss the China FTA, and also ETCA, we are implementing that. And also I want to emphasize when we are considering the FTA, we had so many discussions, negotiations, still that industrial stakeholder participation is also there. Unfortunately, we believe that we can overcome the legal issues of implementing the FTA with Thailand.
Thank you. Rajitha, moving back to a question on lack of raw materials. So the question that's come from the audience is, should we respond to lack of raw materials, coconut rubber, etc.? Should we use the land, should we let the land be utilized for something else? What is your view in terms of where we, particularly industries that are close to Harry's heart in terms of raw materials and land utilization?
Right. I think again, once again, a very important question. Uh, it's always a trade-off between the priorities of a government and a society, uh, and how you balancing it, right? If you look at the coconut, one of the biggest stress, because we are now in a crisis of coconuts. Actually, unfortunately, the current government is facing the brunt of an outcome that has been ill-managed many years ago. Uh, there are a lot of reasons given for the coconut debacle, but the number one reason we identify is the failure in the fertilizing that has happened. We all know what happened there, but the impact of that is coming after many years. And based on our analysis, the single most affecting factor for this drop in coconut is not fertilizing the coconut lands. So that is completely a breakdown of what I call sometimes I can call it an idiotic action that took place. It's an insane action of going into, without any plan, trying to do organic fertilizer in the country. We all know what happened there. But past is gone. What can we do now? Because this is an industry that we have studied. We have studied this industry around the world where the coconut is done. There are two actions. One is quite obvious. We need to grow coconuts, fertilize, north and east, as you have identified as a priority area for any government's development. North and east is the ideal new triangle for coconuts. So replanting has to take place whilst taking care of the existing plantations and certain policies by the government of defragmentation of the land. But impacts of these, the additional crop is going to be 2-3 years down the line. But what can you do now? Because your 3 billion nuts, so-called, we don't know whether that number is correct in the first place, it is supposed to be dropped by about 15%. We are talking about 2.5 billion, 2.6 billion nuts now in this crisis. So the only thing you can do, only prudent action is to import the coconut, right? What else can you do? 3 years to get the crop back, maybe even more. You have a huge shortfall now for consumption as well as for the industry. On top of it, you are trying to say, currently 700, 800 million export target, you want to raise it to $2 billion. So that math doesn't work. If we are not importing the coconut, this cannot be resolved. So why can't we import the coconut? This fear psychosis among the different fraction of the society, government ministries, that allowing the dehusked coconut into the country will create diseases. These are the age-old quarantine rules of the country that has prevented our development. Now, this is where I think we had to be very decisive. Rather than talking about it, take the action and face whatever the consequences of that, import the coconut. Thailand today, as she knows, has one of the largest coconut industries in the world. Thailand has their own coconut plantations, an agricultural country. Their coconut industry largely dependent upon the imported nuts from Philippines and Indonesia. China, the entire industry and the consumption depends on the imported coconuts. And how many other fruits and vegetables do we bring into this country? Why not? Why should they and why should not the coconut? If you have the fear, have proper fumigation practices, certified at the loading port, inspected at the unloading port in Colombo, certified by an authority like SGS, that proper fumigation is done. And we should have at least 500 billion coconuts brought to the country. If we are thinking of increasing the exports, you need to go up to about 1 billion nuts of coconut imports. So this is the only solution. I think time doesn't permit me to talk about rubber, but coconut is a straightforward solution. If there is a will, if you want to take a chance and make a decision, for the betterment of the people of the country and betterment of the industry and the exports.
Rajit, I want to mention that actually the Ministry of Industries and the Ministry of Finance and all the other line ministries, responsible line ministries, now we are in a discussion to import those things, especially the frozen coconut and the milk and other things also. We are in a discussion and we will see.
May I add a little bit? The bringing of the kernel won't resolve the problem because you have to bring it under refrigerated conditions. We did this in a previous government time, and that was a failure.
Yes.
Because by the time it comes to Colombo, it's a very high-cost process. You have to have reefer containers, and that chemical control has to be perfect. And slight alteration of the taste by that is going to reject the shipments. So that has failed. So I'm not too sure why we are trying to attempt that. Why not the coconut? My question is, why aren't we bringing the coconut?
Thank you. I think we'll park the coconut debate for the moment and move slightly on, or we will be here for the rest of the day. Parima, in terms of Thailand, but I do want to pick up on this question of the concept of importing certain things, transforming them, re-exporting, and so on. How much of a change of strategy was needed in the Thai mentality, and did you have similar sort of concerns like you hear today about people being concerned about imports? How did Thailand deal with those issues, and was that an important part of the growth strategy?
I will try to give the specific example. Let's say the importation of some agricultural products into Thailand. So I guess it comes to the coordination, the cooperation between the private sector and the public sector, and you need to really sit down, like, why do we want, how much do we want these raw materials for what industry, and is it necessary? Because, there are always two sides of the coin. So the industry really needs it for the production, the manufacturing. And I believe that Thailand also has the season that we, because coconuts are seasonal. So we also lack some coconuts in some season. So we need to import, but then that's always seasonal. And then what do you want to do with the farmers in the country? Do you want to have them grow more, or how to react and resolve the problems of all the things that in the agricultural industry? Let's say the pesticides, we also have those problems before too, and that's how we had lacked some coconuts, not coconuts, I think like for other products for a while, and then you need to actually get other agencies too, the agencies in agriculture ministry, like how to actually attack all of these questions right away, so then it's not really damages more. And in terms of import and export, I'm just gonna give the example of automotive. So you guys know that we are a big hub for automotive manufacturing industry, but then don't forget that all of those are kind of from the past. That's the fuel automotives. So the technology is now changed, and the EV cars coming. So we actually need we want to attract more investors for the EV cars and the hybrid cars and all of those, because the fuel automotives are really getting outdated. So that's how we need to adapt and adjust. So it's not that we are very happy with where we are. We are still like, okay, the world is changing again. We need to change more and adjust more, because otherwise we will be left behind.
Thank you very much, and we are out of time, unfortunately. So, on behalf of the Chamber, my thanks to my four panelists. Parima, thank you for the presentation. Rajitha, ma'am, Suren, thank you for your time. And thank you also to the audience who have kept us particularly busy with questions. So, please join me in giving a round of applause to our panelists, and thank you so much. I think the Chamber has a small token to be made to the panelists, so if I can ask Kasturi perhaps to come up and do that.